Have you ever sat quietly in your living room, a cup of tea cooling in your hands, and felt a strange kind of peace? The kind that doesn't ask for conversation, doesn't need noise, doesn't even want company. For many people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, this stillness is no longer empty. It's earned. But not everyone understands that. In fact, some may ask, why don't you visit more? Why do you stay home alone so much? Have you become distant? And maybe you've asked yourself that too. Maybe you've wondered, am I isolating myself? Or simply choosing peace? Let me tell you a story about two ordinary Americans, Frank Miller, 72, retired mechanic in Ohio, and Linda Jacobs, 68, a former schoolteacher in Arizona. Frank used to host poker nights every weekend. The house was full of laughter, noise, empty bottles, and old stories recycled 100 times. But lately, he finds more joy in pruning his backyard apple tree than entertaining company. Linda, once the life of every PTA and church potluck, now prefers morning walks alone and listening to classical music by candlelight. When neighbors knock unexpectedly, both hesitate. Not because they don't care, but for bonsoir, but because they've come to understand something deeper. Not every door must be opened, not every relationship must be maintained, and not every moment of silence needs to be filled. Aging in America comes with strange paradoxes. We're told to stay social, stay connected, stay active, as if loneliness is the only threat. But too often, in trying to stay connected, we sacrifice the very peace we've spent a lifetime craving. In our younger years, we were praised for being popular, accessible, always there for everyone. But now, wisdom whispers a different tune. The Roman Stoic Epictetus once said, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Today, he might say, "If you wish for peace, be content to decline an invitation. Let the phone ring, or let the world go on without you for a while." This video is not about cutting people off. It's about choosing wisely, when to connect and when to withdraw. It's about understanding that not all invitations are sincere, not all conversations are safe, and not all visits are welcome. Through the stories of Frank, Linda, and others like them, we'll explore why many elders choose solitude, how boundaries can protect dignity, and what the Stoics can teach us about aging gracefully, with less noise and far more clarity. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is close the door. That's part 1. The wisdom of withdrawing. Why fewer visits bring more peace. Frank Miller had always been the type to say yes. When neighbors knocked with a beer and "You got a minute?" the answer was always yes. When old co-workers wanted to catch up, over loud sports bars and fried food, yes. When his church friends organized barbecues or bingo nights that dragged on past 9 p.m., he'd yawn through it and still say yes. But something shifted after he turned 70. The noise started to feel heavier than the silence. The conversations, once lively, felt shallow, predictable, and he began to realize not all visits were nourishing. Some left him more tired than before they came. It was a hard thing to admit. We grow up believing that saying no is rude, that withdrawing is selfish, that choosing solitude is a red flag. But for the Stoics, solitude wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the first doorway to clarity. "He who is everywhere is nowhere," wrote Seneca. And that's the crux of the matter. Being too available often comes at the cost of being fully present with yourself. Frank started making quiet changes. He stopped answering the door just because it knocked. He stopped apologizing for needing time alone. And most importantly, he began to listen, not to others, but to his own energy. Not everyone understood. His cousin Jerry said, "You used to be so friendly. Now you're like a ghost." But Frank didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a tree, finally growing roots deeper instead of spreading its branches thinner. In Stoic terms, Frank had discovered the power of withdrawal with intention. There is a kind of peace that only comes when you're no longer performing, no longer hosting out of guilt, no longer saying yes out of fear that no means you'll be forgotten. Linda Jacobs, too, faced this crossroads. After decades of being the family glue, the one who organized Thanksgiving, called everyone on birthdays, showed up to every baby shower and funeral, she found herself drained. Her children loved her. Her grandchildren adored her. But the constant stream of visits, favors, and expected presents left her without space to think, to breathe, to be. One day she told her daughter, "I think I need a break from hosting Sunday dinners." The reaction wasn't anger, it was confusion. But slowly her family began to see. Mum was lighter. She smiled more. She started journaling, painting again, even joining a quiet Tai Chi group at the community center. Her home became a sanctuary, not a waiting room. And in that space, relationships became more meaningful, not because they were frequent, but because they were chosen. The Stoics believed that we must guard our energy as fiercely as we guard our time. And at 70 or 80, both become sacred resources, not to be spent on obligations, but on purpose. Here's the truth few say aloud. Not every invitation is sincere. Not every visit is welcome. Not every social interaction is necessary. Sometimes it's okay to step back, not to push people away, but to preserve the space where your soul can breathe. Because as we age, our peace is not found in being seen at every gathering, but in being at peace wherever we are, even if that place is alone. In the quiet with a good book and no doorbell ringing. Withdrawal, when chosen with clarity, is not avoidance. It is mastery. Odd Part 2. When words become weapons. How casual talk can break bonds. If you ask Linda Jacobs today why she no longer stays long at social gatherings, she won't say it's because she's tired. She'll say, "Because I've learned that silence protects more than it costs." The lesson came painfully. It started innocently enough, a rainy afternoon, a cozy apartment, and a gathering of 3 women from her neighborhood book club. They were chatting about their adult children, sharing stories, laughing, venting, as people do. Linda, feeling safe among friends, mentioned that her daughter-in-law never offers to help clean up after dinner. "She's sweet, don't get me wrong," Linda said, "but she acts like a guest in her own home." It was a passing remark, said without anger. But somehow, by phone, by accident, by human nature, that comment found its way to her daughter-in-law. And by the next Sunday, there was tension at the dinner table so thick it smothered the mashed potatoes. Her son pulled her aside and said, "Mom, if you have a problem with her, talk to us directly. Don't gossip." Linda felt like the floor vanished beneath her. She had never thought of it as gossip. She had thought of it as small talk shared between women with similar lives and stories. But that moment became a quiet fracture, one that took months to gently mend. The Stoics warned us of this danger long ago. "Better to trip with the feet than with the tongue," wrote Zeno. "In our youth we speak freely, assuming words will be forgiven, forgotten, or overlooked. But in old age, relationships grow more fragile. The emotional weight behind a single sentence can tip the balance between warmth and distance. That's because, as the years pass, we're not just speaking, we're carving impressions on people's hearts. And sometimes, those impressions cut deeper than we mean them to. It's not just what we say, it's when, where, and to whom. Misspeak once, and your grandchild grows quiet. Speak too freely, and your neighbors withdraw. Pass along a harmless comment, and your circle tightens until no one comes knocking anymore. Stoicism teaches us that virtue begins with discipline of the self, and that includes our speech. Before you speak, ask yourself, is this true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Will it make the listener stronger or simply burdened? Too often, older adults fall into what some call harmless venting. But in truth, many relationships fracture not because of what was done, but because of what was said without care. Linda isn't bitter about what happened. If anything, she's grateful. That misstep reminded her of the power of restraint. Now, when she visits friends, she listens more than she talks. She compliments more than she critiques. And when she's tempted to vent, she asks, "Am I unloading or uplifting?" She also spends more time alone, not because she fears people, but because she's learned that inner peace is easier to maintain when we are not constantly reacting to the outside world. Solitude gave her clarity, but restraint gave her dignity. Let your words be few. Let them be kind. Let them leave no trail of regret. Because the cost of a careless phrase at 70 can be far greater than it ever was at 30. And as the Stoics would say, you cannot unspeak what has already been said, but you can train yourself to speak less and mean more. Part 3. Social comparison and the hidden weight of envy. Every time George Thompson, age 74, visited his old friend Harold, he left with a heaviness in his chest. It wasn't because Harold was unkind, far from it. Harold was generous, welcoming, and proud to show off his pristine kitchen, his big screen TV, and his new hearing aids that connected to his phone via Bluetooth. It was everything. The gleaming hardwood floors, the granite countertops, the sleek mobility scooter parked in the corner. With more features than George's old pickup, George would smile, nod, compliment everything. But when he got back home to his modest apartment with mismatched chairs and fading wallpaper, the silence felt a little colder. He didn't envy Harold's possessions, not exactly. What he envied was the ease, that sense that Harold had figured things out, while George was still juggling bills and trying to stretch a pension that barely made it past the 20th of each month. This, the Stoics would say, is the quiet poison of social comparison. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants, wrote Epictetus. In our later years, the danger isn't in losing status. It's in still believing that we need it. Too many elders visit each other not to connect, but to compare. Who has the bigger house? Who travels more? Whose kids visit more often? Who seems healthier, happier, more put together? And the tragic part is this: the comparison rarely ends in motivation. It ends in subtle shame. The Stoics teach us that we suffer more from what we believe we lack than from what we actually need. George didn't need Harold's house. He didn't need the gadgets. What he needed was to learn how to live within, not around, his circumstances. And that began with withdrawing from situations that constantly stirred envy. He stopped going to Harold's every Sunday, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. Instead, he invited Harold once in a while to his place. They sat in the backyard on 2 old lawn chairs and drank coffee from mismatched mugs. The conversation, surprisingly, was richer, because when the setting was simple, the ego had less room to perform. If we're not careful, even friendly visits become silent contests. But the Stoic answer is not withdrawal out of resentment, it's withdrawal out of wisdom. Spend time with those who make you feel present, not pressured. Visit people who love you for who you are, not what you can show. And most of all, never judge your life's worth by the texture of someone else's wallpaper. As Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." At 70 or 80, we've earned the right to stop performing, to stop explaining, to stop apologizing for having less than others, and start rejoicing in what we do have. A quiet home, a cup of tea, a peaceful afternoon. Because comparison does not age gracefully, but contentment does. Part 4. Solitude versus loneliness. How the Stoics redefined being alone. There's a quiet fear that creeps into the lives of many as they grow older. Will I end up alone? The children are grown. The house that once echoed with footsteps is now still. Phone calls slow down. Holiday dinners feel quieter. The calendar has more blank squares than penciled-in appointments. And suddenly, solitude feels suspicious, like something to escape, like a problem to fix. But what if we've misunderstood solitude? What if, like the Stoics taught, being alone isn't something to fear, but something to cherish? Let me tell you about Martha Green, 76, widowed for almost a decade. When her husband passed, her children rallied around her. There were casseroles, calls, constant company. But as time went on, life moved forward, as it must, and Martha found herself eating breakfast alone again. At first, the silence hurt, but slowly, something beautiful happened. She began to hear her own thoughts again. She started writing in a journal each morning. She noticed birds outside her window. She read books she'd forgotten she owned. She began painting again, not for display, not for praise, but just for the joy of watching color fill a canvas. Someone once asked her, "Don't you ever get lonely?" Martha smiled and said, "Loneliness is when you're waiting for someone to fill the silence. Solitude is when you stop needing them to." That is the Stoic view, that the person who enjoys their own company is never truly alone. Look within. Within is the fountain of good, Marcus Aurelius wrote, and within is where peace begins. Not in parties, not in visitors, not even in family. If your inner world is chaotic, no amount of guests will bring you peace. But if your inner world is calm, even an empty house can feel like a sanctuary. Of course, we are human. We need connection. We thrive on love. But the goal of aging well, as the Stoics remind us, is not to avoid being alone. It is to stop fearing it. It is to know that your value does not shrink in stillness, that your life remains meaningful even if fewer people see it, that you are not a tree falling in the forest. You are the forest. You are the breeze. You are enough. The greatest tragedy is not being alone. It's never learning to enjoy your own company. So when the house grows quiet, don't rush to fill it with noise. Light a candle, open a book, talk to yourself, kindly. Write a letter to your younger self, or simply sit in the golden light of a quiet afternoon, knowing that you are not lacking, you are finally full. Because solitude, chosen and embraced, is not isolation. It is freedom. And as the Stoics would say, better to walk alone with wisdom than to lose yourself in a crowd. Part 5. Redefining respect. Why presence must be invited, not assumed. Not long ago, Robert Hayes, 78, made what he thought was a harmless decision. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and he thought it might be nice to drop in on his son unannounced, just to say hi, maybe play with the grandkids. He brought donuts, a smile, and an old-fashioned sense that family doesn't need appointments. But when his daughter-in-law opened the door, there was a hesitation in her smile. His son came out, hugged him, but looked surprised. The kids were still in pajamas. The house was a mess. And within 20 minutes, the visit was over. Polite, but rushed. That evening, Robert sat on his porch and thought, when did I go from being welcome to being unannounced? It wasn't anger that filled him. It was awakening. He realized that love doesn't automatically mean access, and respect, in this stage of life, sometimes means knowing when not to show up. The Stoics taught that we must never assume we are owed anything by the world, not admiration, not recognition, and certainly not someone else's time. We should not act as if the world owes us comfort, but as if we owe the world our composure, Seneca might say. Too many elders mistake love for license. They believe that because they raised their children, they have the right to come and go as they please. But times change. Lives get busier. Homes become sacred spaces with their own rhythms. What Robert learned, and what many of us forget, is this. The highest form of respect is to wait for the invitation, to be wanted, not just tolerated. Respect today isn't just about good manners or polite conversation. It's about space. It's about boundaries. It's about knowing that just because you want to be close doesn't mean it's the right moment. This doesn't mean withdrawal. It means discernment. Frank Miller, remember him? He now sends a text before visiting his daughter. Just a simple, thinking of stopping by this weekend. Would that be a good time? Sometimes she says yes. Sometimes she says, could we plan for next week instead? And that's okay, because mutual respect is built on clarity, not assumption. The Stoics would call this ataraxia, a state of serene calm, untouched by offense or expectation. When you stop showing up where you're not invited, something miraculous happens. Your presence begins to carry more value. Not because it's demanded, but because it's offered in humility. Not because you're always there, but because you know when not to be. So let go of the old belief that love means constant proximity. In today's world, real love often shows up as space, and real wisdom is knowing how to honor it. When someone says, "Not today," don't hear rejection, hear trust, because they believe you are strong enough, gracious enough to understand. And as the Stoics teach, it's not where you are, or even how often you're seen, that defines your dignity. It's how you carry yourself when no one is looking. Part 6. Practical Stoic Lessons. How to say no, set boundaries, and stay graceful for years. Diane Mitchell, 70, said yes to everything. She said yes when a neighbor asked her to watch their dog for the weekend, even though her knees hurt going up and down the stairs. She said yes when her sister invited her to a 3-day family gathering, even though she needed quiet time after a recent medical treatment. She said yes to her grown children dropping off grandkids for just a couple of hours, which often turned into all day. She wasn't being generous. She was being exhausted. Until one morning she read a quote from Marcus Aurelius: "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That's when it clicked. She had been saying yes out of guilt, not out of virtue. The Stoics weren't cold or distant. They believed in duty, compassion, kindness, but they also believed in self-possession, in knowing yourself well enough to act from principle, not pressure. So Diane made a decision. She would start saying no, but she would do it kindly, clearly, and without apology. The first time her daughter called asking for an emergency babysit, Diane replied, "Sweetheart, I love those kids dearly, but today I'm tired. I need to rest. Can we plan another day that works for both of us?" No drama, no guilt, just truth. And something amazing happened. Her daughter didn't get angry. She said, "Of course, Mom, thanks for telling me." That's the Stoic way: truth with grace, boundaries with warmth, dignity without defense. Let's look at 3 simple principles rooted in Stoic practice that can help anyone, especially in older age. Set boundaries and keep peace of mind. 1. Know what's yours to control. Epictetus taught that we should focus only on what is within our power. You cannot control whether others are disappointed by your no, but you can control your honesty, your tone, and your clarity. 2. Say no without excuse. You don't owe people long explanations. You owe them respect and clarity. Try phrases like, "I'm not available that day, but thank you for thinking of me. I'm prioritizing my health this weekend. Let's find another time that works for both of us." Let your words be simple and still. That is strength. 3. Practice the pause. Before saying yes or no, pause. Ask yourself, am I doing this from obligation or genuine desire? Will this decision protect or deplete my peace? Stoics call this pause reason in action. It's how we remain sovereign over our time and energy. Saying no doesn't mean shutting people out, it means showing up on your terms, so that when you give your time, it is true, not forced. And when people see that your yes is honest, they'll trust you more. They may not always like your answer, but they'll respect your self-respect. Because dignity is magnetic, and boundaries, when set with kindness, teach others how to treat us, not with pity, not with entitlement, but with honor. In the end, the most beautiful kind of grace is not the one that says yes to everything. It's the one that knows when to say no, and says it with a gentle smile. Or Part 7. Final reflection. Seeking peace over popularity is not isolation, it's mastery. As our journey draws to a close, let's pause and consider the quiet strength that lies in choosing peace over popularity. In our youth, we were often celebrated for being social, for lighting up a room with our presence. Yet now, in the golden years of life, true wisdom whispers a different truth, that genuine contentment is found not in constant interaction, but in the serene mastery of one's own inner life. Imagine your world as a vast calm lake at dawn. The surface is still, undisturbed by the clamor of the day. In that quiet reflection, you see your true self, clear, unclouded, and deeply resilient. This is the state we strive for. It is not isolation or loneliness. It is the mastery of living with deliberate balance. It means choosing when to engage and when to retreat, knowing that each decision nurtures your inner sanctuary. The Stoic philosophers taught us that external opinions and social pressures are fleeting. Marcus Aurelius observed, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If we allow the opinions of others to dominate our days, our inner world becomes a chaotic mosaic of expectations and disappointments. Instead, when we choose peace over popularity, we free ourselves to cultivate our inner garden, a space that is both tranquil and rich with meaning. Remember the lessons we encountered. The wisdom of withdrawal taught us that sometimes a measured absence is far more nourishing than a forced presence. Setting boundaries is not a rejection of friendship, but a reaffirmation of self-respect. It protects your energy and your well-being. Embracing solitude isn't about cutting off from the world, but about finding the strength to listen to your inner voice. A voice that, once heard, brings clarity and purpose. In this final reflection, consider the transformative power of saying no when needed and yes only when it aligns with your true self. You are not condemned to a life of relentless social obligations. Rather, you are invited to curate your interactions with care. Every no you speak is an affirmation of your dignity. Every thoughtful yes becomes a conscious gift you offer, both to yourself and to those who truly cherish you. When you seek peace over popularity, you discover that your worth is not measured by the volume of your social calendar or the frequency of your visitors. Instead, your value blooms from within, the quiet, consistent force of a life lived with integrity and purpose. This is not a life of loneliness, but a life of mastery. It is the art of finding balance amidst the noise and silences alike. Let your final act be one of deliberate calm. Nurture the relationships that genuinely uplift you. Respect your space as much as you honor others, and savor the simple moments of quiet introspection. In doing so, you model a way of living that is both courageous and compassionate, a legacy of self-possession that outlasts the transient approval of a crowd. As the Stoics remind us, true mastery lies not in doing more, but in being more fully aware of what truly matters. In your later years, may you find that the greatest achievement is not the applause of an audience, but the peace that comes from knowing your path is chosen with wisdom, and that every moment of solitude is a step toward becoming your best, most authentic self. Choose peace, choose presence, and above all, choose mastery over the illusions of popularity. If this message spoke to you, don't just keep it to yourself. Like this video if you found wisdom in choosing solitude over noise. Comment below, what boundary have you set recently that brought you peace? Subscribe for more Stoic insights to help you navigate aging with strength, dignity, and calm. And don't forget to turn on notifications, because sometimes the quietest truths are the ones we most need to hear. Remember, you don't need to be seen by many. You just need to be known by yourself.